China sees a new window of hope opening with Joe Biden taking office later this month. China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said this during an interview last week. Others have warned, however, don't get your hopes high up as a Biden administration is unlikely to change things fundamentally. So what will be the priorities for U.S. policies on China come 2021? What factors will impact the direction of this relationship? And what's the big trend of history as we go into the new year? I'm pleased to be joined via Skype from East China's Zhejiang province by Professor Zhao Dingxin, founding director of the Center for Advanced Study in Humanities and Social Sciences at Zhejiang University, and also a Max Palevsky Professor at the University of Chicago, and from Philadelphia, Blackburn-Dwyer, president of the consulting company Grasshopper Strategies. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So, Professor Zhao, let me go to you first. Some analysts have said that the Biden administration might not be able to have a clear framework on its China policy before even the 2022 midterm elections. So right now it is facing serious challenges at home, such as pandemic, economic recession, or the task of recovery, and a divided society. What is your take of the situation?
I think first I need to qualify a bit because I don't think American today is in a traditional economic recession because you can see the stock market goes quite well, but it's in a bad time, I should say. And about Biden's China policy, I think that they do have a clear agenda, but I think it's hard to carry through because they've got lots of constraints domestically and internationally, and a way that the public opinion in the U.S. was so negatively shaped by past administration. I think Biden will have a hard time to change it. And moreover, I think because Biden's approach to China needs a much bigger ally, but nevertheless, Biden needs time to repair the relationship with Europe. So it's hard. I think this is my assessment.
Brendan, what do you think the relationship with China, or where does the relationship with China rank in Joe Biden's hierarchy of tasks, of priorities?
Well, I think we need to understand the difference between primacy and priority. So what comes first may not actually be the most important or the most defining relationship from an international relations perspective. Primacy, I think it's very clear that the European Union is going to be first on President-elect Biden's agenda. His soon-to-be official advisors, that's what they've been saying. It's very clear that the Trump administration has created wedge issues, divides, a trade war with the EU, that the ongoing Brexit negotiations have now finally concluded, cause a lot of uncertainty even in that relationship. So the Biden administration is going to have to solidify, fix, and stabilize the EU relationship first. That said, China, I believe, is going to be the most defining international relationship of the Biden administration, just as it has been one of the more defining over the last 20 years for each American administration. Considering the complexity of the China relationship, considering the fact that the Biden administration will want to move beyond trade disputes, they will want to move back into climate cooperation, they will want to move back into political and human rights issues, that the ongoing security cooperation or competitive issues are still going to be there. China will be the most multifaceted and possibly most important relationship over the next 4 years for the United States.
Well, China already shown willingness to improve the bilateral relationship or to stabilize. In a recent interview with CGTN, China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said China-US relations have come to a new crossroads and a new window of hope is opening. We hope that the next US administration will return to a sensible approach, resume dialogue with China, restore normalcy to bilateral relations, and restart cooperation. Professor Zhao, from the U.S. side, of course, we haven't seen any similar message, although there are discussion of what China will be like for the incoming administration. Would you say that China and the U.S. are not on the same page when it comes to the perception of the future bilateral ties?
Of course not, because to me, at this stage, China, both sides, it's China had, in a way, very little to offer to the U.S. on, what the U.S. demanded, on lots of the human rights issues. Or U.S. even, at a certain point, they want China maybe when they have multi-party free election, this kind of system, and China certainly cannot offer. But on the other hand, economically, I think both sides has a lot of room to grow. And so I guess, China, the U.S. has to, in a way, put aside differences, go with the reality first. But on the other hand, the road, I think it's rocky because Biden, like I said before, Biden had so many different constraints to his policy. In a way, we political scientists call that Biden really lacks a kind of autonomy to carry through his policy. But on the other hand, how much, China willing to cooperate, how much, China can sustain different kind of criticisms, from within and without, we do not know. It's hard to say because both sides need to change to make a good relationship, not only economically but politically.
Well,
there's lots of things.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with you, Professor Zhao, because the United States has labeled China a competitor, whether it is a serious strategic competitor or some other, competitor that they have mentioned, for instance, by Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor designate, recently said the new administration will recognize China as a serious strategic competitor. China really hasn't given a definition for the United States. Why? And what does China take the U.S. for? What do you think they should take the U.S. for?
I think China should really treat the U.S. as a friend, because by and large in the last 40 years, and lastly, China was really benefit greatly from a system which is, kind of, benefit from a U.S. hegemony. But on the other hand, the U.S. should really take China. China is now grown up, and China is a different nation. So the United States should really understand China. You cannot really understand China as a traditional competitor in a Western sense because both sides have a very kind of what I call the zero-sum evangelical drive. A party which wants to change fundamentally the nature or culture of another party. China have no this kind of desire. So it's kind of, if you think China is a competitor, also it's another thing, China actually had very little, foreign, interest, except a few core interests like Taiwan, Hong Kong, those issues. And China both, basically, it's all surround China is economic issues, That's But on the other hand, the United States read China in a way as they read like a former USSR, Soviet Union. So they still treat like many of those kind of Cold War rhetoric. So, and I would say, whenever people think and talk about China and US as Cold War are competitive, they should not forget several things. China does not have an ideological ally. And Chinese military is not powerful enough, and China does not have intention to start some kind of proxy war. And then another thing is that China was not a country which we call the other Abrahamic religion or culture, which is really one zero-sum understanding of other party, a very evangelical, a mission-like understanding, so that China was to change other part of the world. So this is, I think, people in the US have to understand. Yeah. China is quite different.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, however, we have to understand the mentality of the incoming Biden administration when they talk about China being a serious strategic competitor. How is that different from the Trump administration's approach to China? Because Biden seems to go for the total de-Trumpetization, in terms of China policy. Will that be the case?
Well, let's not get caught up in everything that Trump did was bad in terms of the policy, and everything that Trump did, that Biden will do, will be completely the opposite. The reality is Trump narrowed the focus of the relationship with China down to trade and, I think, bellicose attempts at arguing who is the bigger, badder country on the world stage. And it was very ego-driven, very personality-driven. And President Trump really proved that the president can define an international relationship without the support of Congress, without really involving anyone other than the administration itself, opening the door for President Biden to really reshape the relationship without constraint. That's where I disagree with my colleague. What we will see with the Biden administration, though, is that it'll be much more multifaceted. It's not going to be as simple as the Biden administration just running away from the tariffs. They've already said, we're not going to immediately lift the tariffs. We don't see any reason to do it quite yet. We don't see any need to rush into that. So they're going to ask China to come to the table and negotiate, just like was trying to be done at the end of 2019 with the Phase 1 deal. Now we're going to need to see what can we pick up for pieces after the pandemic from the Phase 1 deal. Can the Biden administration and the Chinese leadership actually find common ground on trade? And will that common ground survive a much more multifaceted approach in the Biden administration? They're going to bring pressure on strategic issues in the South China Sea. They're going to bring strategic pressure around political issues. They're going to bring up human rights issues that largely the Trump administration has completely ignored for the last 4 years, and a relationship that has largely been defined by Trump as the aggressive, sort of bellicose media hog, and Xi Jinping as sort of the much more stately figure. President Biden's going to bring that much more into sharp relief. It's no longer going to be the wild card Trump. It's going to be a responsible, consistent U.S. leadership that's going to be put next to a Chinese leadership that is playing a larger and larger role on the international stage and doesn't have an easy sort of out of, well, at least we're not Trump. You know, it's going to be a lot harder to make sure that China keeps looking good in the international views when they don't have a foil to play off of like President Trump.
Professor Zhao, you want to respond to that briefly?
I think I largely actually agree. You know, it's I think Trump, Biden, you know, doesn't want to have a very coherent policy. You know, the agenda, which is very clear. I hear several advisors, professors, when I was in the U.S., you know, before August, I hear lots of analysis. This is pretty much Biden intended, or his advisor, you know, intend to do. And so that's if it did very coherently and would actually, you know, put a very coherent, consistent pressure on China. But I guess Biden may not have this kind of, again, I said autonomy, because first, you know, what, you know, the kind of, because whenever Biden do more rational deal with China, what makes some other American would actually simply label Biden as a soft. What can you do? So that's, and also, China, it's so hard to define China as an enemy in the traditional sense because it don't have a very clear, you know, bellicose ideology or a clear expansive ideology. So China just doing business in a way, we should, if it's inactive, quite optimistic. They just continuously adapt to the situation, change. So this kind of enemy, I can say, if you think China is competitive, what we say this competitor did a lot of. Either they think it's a funny thing or things that the people in the U.S. is hard to predict. Okay. Because if you think you particularly treat China in the traditional USSR sense, it's kind of different.
Okay. Well, we have to leave it there. Time running up. Many thanks.